Everybody, happy Thursday. Welcome to Daf Yomi Week in Review. We are, believe it or not, coming up to the end of Bava Metzia. We've only got a few weeks left in this tractate. Though, of course, that means we just switch over to Bava Batra, which will very much feel like a continuation because, of course, Bava Kama and Bava Metzia and Bava Batra are all one big tractate. But still nice to hit a milestone pretty soon at the end of this month. And as always, this is a quick 30-minute lesson to review some of the things that we saw this week in Daf Yomi, taught by a wonderful rotating cast of teachers. And this morning we are joined by Rabbi Elliot Goldberg. Go ahead.
All right. Hi, everybody. I couldn't help but saying, while we're a rotating cast of characters, I'm going to stay as still as possible. Because if I were to rotate while teaching, that might make me and you dizzy. Sorry, I'm both a dad and a rabbi. I tried to swallow that, Rachel, but oh well. Anyways, we could delete that from the recording if you want. I have a wonderful set of texts from this week. A little background also from this week to set them up, and then we'll jump right in. And hopefully, if all goes well, we'll have some time for questions at the end. So we've been talking about the responsibilities of guardians, right? If I take short-term possession of something that belongs to something else, what are my responsibilities to safeguard that item? And this week we encountered a lot of texts about where I'm a borrower, right? There are four kinds of guardians. One of them is a borrower. What's unique about a borrower is I ask you if I could take possession of your item for my own use. Right, there are other categories of guardian where you ask me to watch it for you, but this one is I'm asking you for something so that I can use it. So it's both you're doing me a favor and I have to safeguard your thing that you've given me for that. So let's just say there's a hole in my fence and I need to fix it, and I have a board and I have nails, but I don't have a hammer. I want to borrow your hammer so I can fix my fence. The Jewish law says, Talmudic law says, that as a borrower, I'm responsible for that hammer no matter what happens to it. If it breaks, if it's stolen, if while I'm using it, it falls apart, even if it was old, because I'm a borrower and I'm taking possession of this item for short-term use for free. I'm not paying you for it. I'm borrowing for it. And with that, I take all the accountability. So if something happens to this hammer while I have it before I give it back, I have to buy you a new hammer or pay you the value of the hammer. And there's an exception to this, which will matter for the text we're going to look at, which says, if I borrow your services, meaning along with your item, then this rule that I take responsibility for it is off. So let's say I have to fix the hole in my fence and I have nails and I have a board, but I don't have a hammer. And I say to you, hey, what you doing tomorrow morning? I'm going to fix my fence and I can use your hammer and you're a really good fence fixer. Can you come too? And you come with the hammer and together we're fixing the fence because I've acquired your hammer, but you're there too. And I borrowed your services with the hammer. Should the hammer break while we're fixing my fence, you're responsible for the damage to replace it because you're there with me. That's how the law works. And what we're going to look at is what I think is both an interesting and fun passage where the rabbis tell you, here's how to get around that law if you really want to, which I find humorous. I'll say a little bit about it at the end too. It's like they set up this whole system. We have this law. I'm responsible for your hammer, but if you come too, you're responsible for your hammer. And then they tell you as a borrower what you could do to try to make sure you're never responsible for anything that you borrow. And here's how I'm going to tell you. So let me share my screen and we'll go right to the text. Thank you for your patience through that introduction, but I think it will help us as we go. And here goes the slideshow. All right. Rava says, with regard to one who wants to borrow something from another and be exempt from liability, that's the part I love. Rava is saying, let's say you want to borrow something, you're fixing your fence and you need your neighbor's hammer and you don't want to be responsible for the hammer. Let them say to the lender at the time of borrowing, pour me water. Rava says, if you don't like this rule, here's how you get around it. I go to you and say, I'm fixing my fence. I got nails. I got wood. I don't have a hammer. Can I use your hammer? And can you pour me a glass of water? And by doing so, not only do I get your hammer to use to fix my fence, but as the text says, the borrower will be exempt, as is the case of borrowing an item and borrowing or hiring the services of its owner with it. So by asking you to pour me water, I've engaged you in part of the borrowing deal, and I've acquired your services. You're going to pour me a glass of water. Boy, was I! Before I go out and fix my fence, I'm really thirsty. Can you give me some water too? Yes, you say, because you're a nice neighbor. But lo and behold, what you might not know unless you study this text is Rav is telling the borrower, if you do it this way, then if the hammer breaks, a borrowed item breaks, the borrower is not on the hook for it because technically here, at the time that they borrow the item, they also acquired the services of the owner. So Rava's advice is if you're going to borrow something and you don't want to be responsible for it, here's the way around this whole system of law. It made me chuckle when I found this because we had pages and pages and pages about the borrower and the owner's services, all the ins and outs and all the rules. And the rabbi's clarified it, and now Rava's saying, yeah, here's the loophole. You could just get around to get a glass of water too. But lo and behold, that's not the end of the story. Oh, there's another. Oh, there we go. There's another slide, but no text. Here's the text. The Gemara points out if the lender is I practiced this word. I learned a new word today. Perspicacious, which means like sharp and careful and knows all the details. Meaning, I think this is a fancy way of saying has a Talmud cup, right? A Talmud brain. If the lender is perspicacious and wishes to prevent the borrower from being exempt from liability, let them say in response, borrow the item first, and when we're done with the borrowing, then I will pour water for you. So Rava gives you the workaround. Hey, just, borrow the hammer and ask for a glass of water, and then you're off the hook, no liability. And the Gemara says, well, if you're going to give everyone the workaround, we have a workaround back for the loaner, for the lender. The lender could just say, sure, I'll get you water, but let's finish our business. Let me get the hammer. Let me give you the hammer. Let's then have a separation between the borrowing, and then I'll pour you water. And then I'm just being neighborly. I'm giving you the water. And I'm not taking on, happy to give you the water, but I'm not taking on responsibility for the hammer while you borrow it. So I'm going to separate these two things. So Rava thought he was clever, but the Gemara is clever back. And now everyone knows what to say to try to pass the responsibility. And actually, if both the borrower and the lender know this text or are perspicacious themselves, when the borrower tries to get water with the hammer, the lender will know not to separate the two, and then the original rules apply. And the borrower, as I think the borrower should, takes responsibility for the item that you borrow. So this is just fair warning. If a neighbor comes by and says, can I borrow some sugar? Can I borrow your lawnmower? Can I borrow a ladder? Whatever it is, if they ask you for water, just be careful. If you want to be neighborly and give them the water, just do it after the transaction is complete, and then the water pouring is neighborly and has nothing to do with the borrowing or shifting the responsibilities. The Gemara takes a tangential turn here, but that's related, but moves a little away from borrowing and lending just items between neighbors. And Rava says the following. If you notice, it's another teaching of Rava. Last time I was here, I forget which rabbi. We had a whole list of teachings by the same rabbi. And since one was brought, the next one also. It happens we're in the middle of a couple of pages where there are a whole series of teachings of Rava, generally related to the same topic. But for those who were here, I don't know, about a month ago, just want to remind you that sometimes the Gemara teaches a teaching of one teacher and sticks with it. This is one of those. It's Rava again. And if you go back to page 96, 97, you'll see a whole string of Rava's teachings that are grouped together here, probably a remnant of the way in which teachings were memorized, right? One of the memorizers before this was written down had Rava. They were assigned Rava's teachings and they memorized them together. And then when they became written down, they all stuck together. So that's just an aside, but I thought I would add it as it echoed what we talked about. Don't remember, about a month ago when I was here. Anyways, Rava says, a teacher of children the local gardener, the local butcher, and the local bloodletter, and a scribe of the city, with regard to all of them, any of these people, if someone borrows an item from them at the time of their work, they are exempt from liability, as the case is comparable to borrowing an item and borrowing and hiring the owner with it. So this is an interesting statement here. Rava says he identifies a certain number of public workers: teacher of children, gardener, butcher, bloodletter. I guess that's the doctor, the scribe, maybe the notary public, right? That's maybe the role that they played. These folks are always working for the city. They're always working for the community. And therefore, when they're at work, if you borrow something from them, you already have access to their services, and the borrower becomes exempt from liability, right? The local gardener, their job is to garden locally, take care of, I don't know if this is the case in Talmudic times, but I think of, like, right, the people who care for the flowers, like in front of the shops, right, and in the city square, or the mowing the lawn on the highway, right? We are always have their services, and since we always have their services, if we were to borrow a tool from them, we sort of always have access to their services, and following the rule we talked about before, that means we don't take responsibility as borrowers for the items that they have, since we already have access to their services. That seems a little unfair to me, because here are people who are public servants. They have tools. If we borrow their tools, you would think maybe we have an extra responsibility to take care of the public servants' tools as opposed to none. But this is consistent with the rules from before. But it turns out the Gemara is not so happy about it. We're going to talk about, how this doesn't work. And just about one of these public officials on the list, it happens we're going to turn to how this affects teachers of children. Seems to me the rabbis are especially interested in that category, not the others. There's not as long of a discussion about these other public officials, but since the rabbis were teachers, I think they take up, how they feel about this rule. So the rabbis say to Rava about his own rule, "Hey, master, you are lent us to teach us Torah," right? They're echoing what he said before. Rabbis are on this list. They're always teaching us. We're always have access to their teaching. So if we borrow an item from you, Rava, we should be exempt from liability. So the rabbis say, we are following your rule, Rava. We can borrow your stuff and we're not responsible for it based on what you just taught, because you're our teacher. You're always supposed to teach us. We can borrow from your stuff all the time, and you, Rava, will be responsible. Rava gets angry by this, which is interesting, maybe by the thought. As I thought about it, I think maybe he's angered that they want to take advantage of him and not have the right responsibility. But and they're throwing his teaching in his face. He was angered by this, and he said to them, "Do you want to take my money away from me? But you want, if you're not responsible for any of the things that I lend you, like eventually I'm going to lose all my money, because like I'm going to lend you stuff and I'm not going to. They'll break, or something will happen. I won't get my money." So he says, on the contrary, I am not lent to you, rather you are lent to me. Rava says, wait a minute, you got it backwards. It's not that I, as a teacher in this area, are lent to you, that you have my services. As my students, you are lent to me. Why? Because when we're together teaching and learning, you assist me in consolidating my Torah knowledge. It's not that the work that's happening is not me teaching you Torah, says Rava, but the work that's happening is you are sharpening my knowledge. You're helping me organize, consolidate my knowledge in my head. So really, he's flipping it. When you borrow my stuff, you're responsible for it, but maybe you're lent to me. So when I borrow your stuff, I'm not responsible for it. You are, because I have your services, because as my students, provide an important service to me. You help consolidate my Torah knowledge. I would say at this moment, well, I'm not holding any of you on the hook on Zoom here. If you were to borrow something from me, I do thank you for coming with such large numbers to this this weekly occurrence because it does help me consolidate my knowledge as I prepare to teach. So I get the sentiment that Rob is saying that I benefit from teaching from you and you're providing a service for me. I'll still lend you my things and not, hold you and try. Or but I can still, if I borrow from you, I'll take on the responsibility for that. I was trying to sure. Anyways, the proof for this, how does Rava has a proof text or a proof fact? How do I know that you're assisting me? He says, whereas I am able to deflect you from one tractate to another, you are not able to deflect me from what I wish to teach. Meaning, if you go into Rava's classroom and you say, I want to learn Masechet Pesachim today, Rava could say, nope, I'm not teaching Pesachim, I'm teaching Bava Metzia. And you have to learn what he has to teach. And that's proof that you're assisting me with what I want to do, and you're not able to deflect me from what I wish to teach, right? If you come in and try to teach something else. So he's saying, how do I know that you're assisting me? It's because you assist me with what I want to do. I've borrowed your services to study what I want to be teaching. So I guess maybe before I said this might be an example of you assisting me, but you're assisting me. I guess I have to teach. I couldn't come and teach Masechet Pesachim today because it's not what I was contracted to do in the Daf Yomi class. And I know because the first time I taught, like years and years ago, for a Daf Yomi day, review of the week, I figured the week was Sunday to Saturday, and I taught something from Friday, which would be tomorrow. And some of you meticulous folks out there spoke up about, wait, that's a spoiler because that's tomorrow. The week goes Thursday to Thursday with the class. So you might be able to deflect what I get to teach in the session. Anyways, we'll have to think about what our choice of material relationship is based on this. But I'm stuck to this week, so maybe not like Rava. Anyways, what Rava is saying is I get to pick what we teach, and you assist me in consolidating my learning. So actually, I've acquired your assistance in this labor. And therefore, if I borrow something from you, I'm not responsible for it. But in the reverse, you're responsible for the things you borrow from me. Flips it on its head from before, after the rabbis throw his teaching from before in his place. I'd love to see what they talk about in terms of the gardener and the other public servants, but it's interesting to think about the case here of when we borrow something from a neighbor and when we borrow something from a public official, is our responsibility different and how? And the Gemara gives you one take on it. One more piece to this story. The Gemara says, well, it's not so that a teacher is never lent to their, it's not so that the teachers never lent to their students. Right? Rava's sort of claim is my services are never lent to you because I get to pick what I teach. But the Gemara says that's not true all the time. This is a nice historical thing to just know about. During the days of the Kala, right? The Kala was a gathering for Torah study that happened twice a year in the month of Elul and in the month of Adar. Halfway, right? Elul's right before, right? These are the months right before the big New Year, the big months in the calendar. Elul's right before Tishrei, right? Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, and Adar's right before Nisan, right? Pesach, which for some people is one of the New Year cycles. But these were the 2 months of the year where, in rabbinic culture, in Eretz Israel and in Babylonian, we know this from some of the manuscripts, like there was an official gathering for people to study, and it was declared what the tractate would be. And what we think about how Torah was studied was for the other months of the year, people studied on their own or they studied locally with local teachers. And if we follow what Rava said there, the teacher could say, here's what we're studying these days. But for these huge gatherings where people would leave their homes for a month to go and study, it was the teacher was required to teach a particular subject, and therefore in these months the teachers lent to them. Right, during the rest of the days of the year, the students are lent to the teacher, as Rava thought. But in these months, the other months, the students are lent to the teacher because the teacher is sharpening his knowledge, teaching whatever he wants. But in these 2 months, actually, the teacher is lent to the students because the teacher has to do whatever the masechet that was chosen for that year. It's interesting in some of our modern institutions these days. I know you can go study, I believe at the Hartman in Israel or the Conservative Yeshiva in Israel or at Hadar in New York or other places as well. Sorry if I didn't pick your favorite, for example. There are Elul. You could sign up for Elul learnings. It's not exactly Kala because it's not that the whole Jewish people or all the students of Talmud go and do that, but this practice of taking the month of Elul before the new year and studying something intensely is something we still do. It's close to the end of the summer many years, so it fits into sometimes a vacation time. Adar is a little harder in terms of our modern work schedule, but there's a remnant or maybe a revival of this teaching in the contemporary era. But it sort of says there was a time where the community would say, this year we're studying this Masachet, and everyone would come to the big yeshivot and they would study these masechtot. And in those times, it was required to study what they teach, which was a flip of during the year where the teacher got to pick what the subject matter. Anyways, that's the last text I want to point you to today. So we started with the rules of borrowing, and Rava gave us a way around the rules, and then the Gemara gave the lender a way around the rule, around the exception to the rule, to go back to the rule, meaning if you don't want to be on the hook, separate the water request from the borrowing request. And then it led us to think about, what about people who are always in our service? Is borrowing working differently? And then a little digging into what's the teacher-student relationship. And these last texts, I think, are really interesting to think about as we both are studying the teachings of the rabbis of the Talmud in this passage, and we have many stories about what teaching and learning was like in the Talmudic era as memorized, as recorded in the Talmud. And it's interesting to me anyways in these texts how the rabbis shape that relationship about who's in charge and whose services are being borrowed by whom. I think that's it's more about the teacher-student relationship than about if you borrow a pen from your teacher while you're at the Beit Midrash, who has to pay for it if it breaks. But it came up in that context, but it adds to our thinking about what's the relationship between teachers and students. All right, I'm going to stop my share the screen. You could see me bigger now. And
Thank you. I don't think we've had a lot of opportunities to talk about this like model of adult education that the ancient rabbis had. Daf Yomi, as people probably know, is sort of a new approach to Talmud study. This idea of doing a page a day until you work through the whole thing, but that's not how the rabbis did it, right? And so, and this idea of a biannual kala, where you get together and you intensively study a subject, is more the model. And I think it's fun. I wish we had a way exactly to do that.
It was, I mean, just to say these rabbis couldn't do Daf Yomi because the Talmud wasn't finished yet. Just an technical, right? And
they're creating the Talmud as they're studying it.
Right. And some of my teacher, Professor Dmitrovsky, taught me about how his sense was when they would gather for a kala to repeat whatever masechet that they had studied however many years before, they would start with saying, all right, who remembers the teaching about it? And you would get the short Aramaic statements like, oh, about this Mishnah, here's what Rava says, here's what Abai says. And then in the Babylonian academies, they would ask questions about it that led to the more complex conversations after it. So it was actually potentially that these kalot, these gatherings, had influence over the early stages of the development of the Talmud. And maybe the parallel to that is Rachel, like through the Daf Yomi email and these teachings, we happen to have mine right here. Here, free plug. We put together, right? We have our own teaching. Oh, it got blurred. Sorry, I have to put it in front of my face. Teaching of the Talmud. This is our Masechet Pesachim volume, right? So the learning that we did lead to a text. So maybe it's, I don't know, one parallel to what we see. But yes, nice point.
And of course that came out in Adar, right? Yeah. So Elul and Adar strike me as not accidental, right? They lead into the two major festivals of the year, which on the rabbinic calendar, of course, are Pesach and then 6 months opposite on Sukkot, right? And those are moments in the calendar that months in the calendar that lead into the sort of big ritual complexes of the Jewish year, right? In Adar, we're right ahead of Pesach, which then ultimately connects to Shavuot. And in Elul, we're right ahead of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. So right. I like that idea.
Yeah, and also the Shabbat before Pesach, Shabbat Gadol, was one of the big times for a public teaching. And Shabbat Shuvah between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur also was one of the big times for public teaching. So I don't know if there's a connect, those were fixed times, sort of saying these are big times for learning.
Yeah.
It might also be they're both right before a busy agricultural season. I don't know if that fits also. It might be a time where there was a little more downtime for the agrarian folks that gave them that luxury. Although we know some of the rabbis that we read about in the Talmud were wealthier and didn't have to work and were supported in their teaching, and others of them had everyday, hands-on blue collar and feet in the dirt and get your nails dirty jobs as well.
Yeah.
Um,
And of course, the Jewish holidays are linked to the agrarian cycle as well. But I kind of wonder actually whether Elul would have been a downtime on anybody's calendar, right? Isn't that getting to the end of getting into the thick of harvest season?
well, you busted me. I'm not really a farmer. I know, like at Sukkot is the
We
harvest
need
festival.
Ben Harris here.
I don't know how many.
Farmers, comment below. Let us know.
Right, that's true.
My
I'll ask
colleague
Ben.
Ben Harris, one of the other editors at My Jewish Learning, is also a farmer. He knows all these things.
Yes. All right.
Okay. If anyone has a question they want to ask, we have just a couple of minutes. If not, we can wrap up for today. Okay, Claudette, I see, has her hand up. Let me give you the power to unmute. There we go.
Looking at this law, why would the teacher or the doctor want to engage in lending? It's just like, the law where, the borrower can not pay back at the end of a period of time. So why would somebody lend money to that individual when they know that the time is coming that they would not be receiving that loan?
Yeah, that's a great Claudette. Yeah. I have to go back to my slide for that fancy word I learned today. That was sharp Talmud thinking. Perspicacious. Did I say that right? I don't know. That's a new word I'm learning today. So that's a great question, right? If you're a public servant and therefore you're always working for the people and they have your services, if you were to lend them something, you would still retain the responsibility for it, not the borrower. And what I hear you saying is, if I was the teacher, if I was the doctor, if I was the notary public, I wouldn't lend anything to anybody because I don't get the
Right.
I don't get the protection for it. And what you've pointed out is like sort of an imbalance. There's something not fair about this rule,
Right.
and that would prevent certain people from being good neighbors, right? At least while they're. So one response I have to that is, if this happens off hours is different from on hours, meaning if you borrow for something while they're at work, they're on the hook for that. But it could be that if you wait till off hours and they're really your neighbor and you borrow it in the evening when they're not at work, it's okay, and then they would lend. I wonder also, I didn't follow this through the generations. I wonder if this rule or exception to the rule stuck in Jewish law moving forward. Meaning, I imagine later in the commentary, someone brought up exactly your question, but I don't know what the later legal theories have. But that's what I love about that, Claudette, and I'm not surprised because you come with sharp thinking, to this class a lot. That's really good Talmudic logic you're applying to what we read today. And sometimes, as a Talmud teacher, I think it's an awesome question. It just shows what you're getting out of the Talmud, even if we don't have a clear answer about this particular case. But I think
Thank
you're
you,
totally right.
Rabbi.
Yeah, you're
I must
totally.
say I enjoy your teaching, really.
Oh,
Our
thank you.
learning with you, because you learn with us.
It's true. You sharpen my learning. So thanks, Claudette. I saw someone in the comments ask about what a Bailey is. We don't use that term a lot. I just wanted to clarify that. Like, right, it's in the English translation a lot, but a Bailey is someone who borrows someone, is given something to safeguard it for a fee. So it's a different kind of guardian, right? The Talmud, the English translations, many of them use that word for like shomer is the Hebrew word, but it's someone who's taken on the responsibility for something and It could be they're paid, it could be they're unpaid. Those are the two different categories, but they have a role where I'm going to watch this thing for you and you're going to pay me money for it. I mean, the closest thing, right? We have baileys today, like, well, bail is right there. Well, there are bail services. It's a little different about if you have to pay bail to get out of jail. There are people who give you money for that. And sometimes you have to leave them a deposit or or some kind of commitment if you run away with their money. That's a little different, but that's where we more often use the term bailey in our society. The rabbis weren't talking about it there, but we see that, it was an English word we don't use as much in common parlance unless we're studying the Babas for Talmud. Anyways,
I'll just piggyback on Rabbi Goldberg's comment about the word Bailey. This is something we thought about on the editorial end as we were editing these pieces. And earlier in the tractate, I actually took out every time it said Bailey and put in caretaker, because Bailey, like, it is the correct English word for someone who is responsible for somebody else's item, whether they are paid or unpaid, but it's not a word that most of us use in everyday language. But caretaker also doesn't quite capture it. So this has been a struggle on our end editorially to figure out what the clearest way to present that in the text is. And I have in more recent weeks allowed Bailey to creep into the pieces when I think it is hopefully clear from context, but I appreciate hearing from you that maybe that isn't as clear as it should be. Yeah, there isn't like a great colloquial English word for the term, but it is exactly as Rabbi Goldberg said, somebody who has responsibility for somebody else's item, whether they are paid or unpaid to take that responsibility.
While you were talking, Rachel, someone put in the chat a coat check. Like, you go to an event or you go to the museum, the coat check is sort of like, we don't use the term Bailey for that, but that's a good modern example of what the rabbis are talking about. I give you my coat to watch it, and then I go look at
sitter also.
Pet sitter.
Since we have a lot of cows and things in this tractate.
Right. We have a lot of Baileys that we use. We just don't call them that. There you go.
Yes.
All right.
Yes, concept. All right. Wonderful to see you all. We will see you in this space next week. And in the meantime, in your inbox at what is 5 a.m. for the East Coast of the United States tomorrow morning, whatever time that is for you. So lovely to learn with you all. Thank you, Rabbi Goldberg. Thank you to all of you for your great questions and comments, and we will see you soon. Bye.